analyzing the results of round 2, group 22.
So these are not novices.
Not at all. These are 4 established winners. Each one has already proven they belong on this exclusive stage by winning their first round group or at least surviving it.
And the lineup for this group is it's wildly diverse. It sets up one of the most fascinating genre battles we've seen so far in the album quest. We have 2 colossal, generation-defining compilation albums going head-to-head with 2 really powerful but completely different studio albums.
And what's so interesting is that the 2 studio albums were released in the same year.
Yeah, 2010. So you're crossing this huge spectrum from, the 1960s all the way to modern metal and punk.
It's a massive span of time and style.
So let's name them. Our 4 champions fighting desperately for just 2 spots in round 3 are Chronicles by the legendary Steve Winwood.
A classic.
The almost mythically untouchable Beatles won by, of course, the Beatles.
The heavyweight.
The dark punk urgency of this addiction from Alkaline Trio, and finally the sprawling epic metal behemoth, The Final Frontier by Iron Maiden.
I mean, that group right there, it tests all your fundamental assumptions about what makes music good. It pits this, polished 80s adult contemporary against foundational 60s pop rock.
Right.
And then it asks them to compete with modern, aggressive punk and this really epic, almost proggy heavy metal.
So our mission in this album quest today is to synthesize the detailed, really micro-level judgments that Green to Rock's laid out. We need to figure out what specific, granular elements push the 2 winners through to round 3.
And just as importantly.
And understand exactly why the other 2, despite their proven round 1 victories, just couldn't maintain that necessary consistency and quality under the, frankly, intense scrutiny of the album quest.
Right. Before we even get into the music itself, I think we have to establish the theoretical framework that governs this whole competition, especially when it comes to the status of 2 of our contenders.
You mean the compilations? Beatles 1 and Chronicles.
Precisely. Because this is where the quest gets a little philosophical, isn't it?
It really does. Because on the surface, a compilation album feels like cheating. It really does. It's all the best parts, right? Meticulously selected over years of a career. So how can a single studio album, which is burdened by the possibility of having a few weaker tracks, how can it possibly defeat a compilation of 20 or 30 guaranteed hits?
That is the core tension, and the quest author addresses it head-on. Green notes that compilation albums are structurally vulnerable in this kind of high-stakes, repeated listening competition. Their very nature makes them susceptible when they're pitted against what he calls beautifully crafted albums that imbue an holistic body of work.
Okay, we hear that phrase a lot in the album quest analysis, holistic body of work. What does the author actually mean by that in, practical terms? What are we listening for?
Oh, it means that a truly great studio album is greater than just a linear collection of songs. It's about the architectural design of the thing. The argument is that these albums are more than the sum of their parts.
So the flow.
Exactly. It emphasizes 3 key elements. First, the specific intentional ordering of the tracks. Second, the sustained emotional or sonic vibe that runs through the entire record. And third, the overarching thematic coherence.
So in this system, if a song is, say, an excellent song, a 10 out of 10, but its placement on the album disrupts that flow, that vibe, it actually becomes a liability.
It can, yeah. Whereas a compilation, by its very definition, it tends to prioritize commercial impact or, chronology over that carefully crafted flow.
That makes sense.
A compilation is often engineered for maximal commercial impact or maybe for historical archiving. It's not built for sustained, deep, repeated listening as a single entity. However, and this is a huge however, the author immediately counters this with the necessary exception. Some compilations, and Beatles 1 is the prime example, are just so historically significant and so qualitatively dense that they manage to overcome this inherent structural vulnerability. They're just too good.
That sets the stage for Group 22 perfectly. It's the big question. Can the structural purity of the holistic body of work, as represented by Iron Maiden and Alkaline Trio, can it truly overcome the sheer, undeniable, raw quality of the Beatles and Winwood's hits?
And to figure that out, we need to establish the pedigree of these albums. I mean, just getting to round 2 is a massive achievement in itself. This isn't a random selection. These are survivors.
Let's start with the undisputed heavyweight in the room, the Beatles 1. This collection earned its place by absolutely topping its group in round 1, Group 113. And you have to look at the artists they eliminated. It was a group that really tested modern appeal.
It really was.
They dispatched Avril Lavigne's The Best Damn Thing, One Republic's Dreaming Out Loud, and the self-titled debut from Audioslave.
That's just a fascinating display of cross-generational dominance. I mean, you have massive 2000s commercial success right there. Avril Lavigne and One Republic were absolute chart monsters in their day.
Yep.
And then you have the raw power of the Audioslave supergroup with Chris Cornell. And the Beatles compilation, drawing on music that's fundamentally from the 60s, it just clearly demonstrated a timeless, universal quality that easily transcended those contemporary successful albums.
It didn't just win, it dominated.
It totally dominated.
Okay, next up we have Iron Maiden's The Final Frontier. This one also secured first place, topping round 1, group 186. They took down the Shaman's Boss Drum,
Whoa, that's a different vibe.
breaking Benjamin Saturate and Stain's Dysfunction.
So Maiden proved its staying power against some really heavy 90s and 2000s competition. Boss Drum represents that whole acid house dance sphere,
Right.
while Breaking Benjamin and Stain really anchor that group in post-grunge and nu metal. Winning that group means the Final Frontier successfully embodied a heavy metal standard that was high enough to overcome these really diverse, commercially successful rock and dance influences. It showed its strength.
Now let's shift gears to the second place finishers from round 1. We'll look at Alkaline Trio's This Addiction. They finished second in round 1, group 143. Now, they had the unenviable task of being in a group with Linkin Park's Meteora,
Which is a monster of an album.
a truly defining rock album of the 2000s, but they notably eliminated Live's Secret Samadhi and, critically for this discussion, another Iron Maiden album. Best of the B-sides.
Okay, that right there, that is a crucial piece of evidence for this current grouping. Alkaline Trio's studio album, their holistic work, proved it had the staying power, the tightness, and the quality to beat a curated compilation of B-sides from the very metal giant it is now facing again.
That's a great point.
It heavily suggests that, in the context of the album quest, the focus of an album like This Addiction is an incredibly powerful tool. It can punch above its weight.
And finally, rounding out the group, Steve Winwood's Chronicles. This compilation secured its spot in round 2 by finishing second in round 1, group 67. It came in just behind the complex progressive rock of IQ's Subterranea.
Another holistic album.
Exactly. And it eliminated Saxon's classic metal album, Wheels of Steel, and the much more niche electronic music of the Turrican soundtrack by Chris Hieselbeck.
So if you look at the pattern, both compilations managed to sneak through, but they did it in second place. This sort of demonstrates the inherent difficulty they have in totally dominating when they're compared against meticulously structured, holistic studio albums like Subterranea in Winwood's group.
So Chronicles is a proven survivor, yeah, but it's relying on pure song quality. Now it has to face 2 studio albums that really prioritize that flow and that structure.
The stage is set.
With the context set and the rules of engagement established, let's jump straight to the thrilling but maybe little predictable outcome.
I think we all know where this is headed.
We have to be clear right at the outset.
Uh-huh.
The Beatles easily wins this group. I mean, it wasn't even close. It was a fundamentally dominating performance from start to finish.
And this elevates One to the status of the third Beatles album to successfully navigate its way to round 3 in the album quest. It follows Sgt. Pepper's victory in a previous group.
The author's analysis is just. It's drenched in admiration. He notes a real resurgence in his own appreciation for the Fab Four over this rigorous testing period. He actually mentions, and I'm quoting here, "I think I've fallen back in love with the Beatles."
And that's the power of this process, isn't it? That kind of repeated critical exposure to just undeniable genius. It can rekindle that flame.
It really can. And what makes Beatles 1 such a potent and almost unstoppable contender in this format is the sheer discipline of its structure. It's not just a random collection of hits.
No, it's very specific. It's a strictly chronological assembly of virtually every #1 single the band achieved in both the UK and the US between 1962 and 1970.
That chronological assembly isn't just a list. It becomes a story.
Yeah.
It's like an involuntary history lesson. Across those 27 tracks, you're not just listening to hits.
No, you're mapping the rapid, almost alien evolution of 20th century music and popular culture. It all happens right there on one disc.
Let's break down that narrative journey because it's fascinating. You start with the foundational early beat hits, Love Me Do, Can't Buy Me Love, She Loves You. These are just pure, infectious 60s pop energy. They're simple in their structure, but revolutionary in their delivery.
And then the transformation just accelerates. It's like a switch is flipped, the band starts experimenting, and the music becomes progressively more complex, more groundbreaking with each single. You get the concise, heartbreaking narrative of Eleanor Rigby.
Unbelievable song.
right alongside the acoustic perfection of yesterday. And then you move into the raw power of Come Together and the absolute anthem of hope, Let It Be.
And the list just goes on and on. It creates this truly comprehensive, career-spanning body of work. Paperback Writer, Help, Ticket to Ride, and of course the expansive epic that is Hey Jude. The sheer quality forces the author to question whether any single studio album could ever even come close to topping such a sumptuous assemblage of singles.
And one of the most critical observations he makes, one that connects this compilation back to the broader quest, is the street pepper contrast.
Right.
The author notes that there is absolutely no crossover between Beatles 1 and Street Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
That is just mind-boggling when you think about it. I mean, Street Pepper is routinely cited as the absolute peak of the album format, the holistic body of work personified.
Exactly. And yet, nothing on that landmark studio album reached the top of the charts in the US or the UK, so none of that material appears on One. It's the perfect illustration of the album quest's dual standard.
How so?
It's judging the compositional excellence of a holistic album on one hand versus the undeniable commercial and qualitative excellence of chart-topping singles on the other. And in the Beatles' case, the two standards are mutually exclusive, yet it seems equally weighted in the quest.
Okay, now, despite the absolute magic that's contained within this album, the author's meticulous attention to detail means that even this undisputed champion is subject to some critical observation.
Of course, nothing is perfect, specifically regarding the technical flaws. The kind of flaws that are inherent when you're compiling tracks that span nearly a decade of, inconsistent technology and engineering.
Right. While the songs are still, quote, incredibly well produced for the period, the author does acknowledge that some of the earlier tracks are showing their age. They sound a little simplistic when you judge them against hyper-polished modern productions.
But that's not the main critique.
No, the true actionable critique lies in the mix inconsistency and these minor engineering slips that compilation albums always struggle to eliminate entirely.
Let's focus on those hyper-specific critiques, because this is where the deep dive really happens. The author caught two specific issues that really stood out to him.
The first one is perhaps less surprising. It's about volume inconsistency. The track Can't Buy Me Love sounds perceptibly quiet in the mix compared to the tracks around it.
So it forces a minor volume adjustment, which disrupts the flow. It pulls you out of the experience. Precisely. But the second one is truly astonishing, and it just demonstrates the incredible rigor of this repeated listening process. The author notes that the classic track Help seems to start a split second too late.
A split second? How on earth do you even notice that? I mean, I've heard that song 1,000 times.
Well, think about the level of listening that requires. You have to be listening not just to the music, but to the timing of the track's start, comparing it again and again across a dozen listening sessions. That level of precise timing critique just shows the rigor of the quest.
So the question becomes, when you listen that many times, does that tiny timing error become an obsessive distraction? Does it effectively penalize the album for a micro flaw?
For the author, it clearly registered as a technical blemish. A small one, but a blemish nonetheless, even if the surrounding material is pure gold.
And this is the paradox of the album quest, isn't it? The sheer quality of tracks, like the cracking rock riff on Paperback Writer, the supreme melodic excellence of Ticket to Ride, and those addictive early hits like I Want to Hold Your Hand.
They're just too strong!
They're so fundamentally strong that they just transcend these minor engineering blemishes.
The material is simply too powerful to be denied. So Beatles 1 is confirmed as a truly superb collection. It secures first place, it advances to round 3, but it carries with it these small wounds, these little scars inflicted by the intense scrutiny of the quest.
That sets an almost unbeatable bar. So let's transition from that undeniable historical compilation power to our second compilation entry. This one provides a completely different kind of musical experience, one steeped in comfort and nostalgia.
We're talking about Steve Winwood's Chronicles.
Yes. Moving from the Beatles to Steve Winwood's Chronicles is like moving from a historical, objective survey of excellence to a really subjective, personal journey that's rooted in familiarity.
That's a great way to put it. This album generates a distinct, warm, familiar, comfortable feeling for the author. It's something they have genuinely enjoyed since their childhood.
That emotional resonance is a massive asset in any subjective ranking system. It gives it an immediate bias toward the positive, doesn't it?
It does. But nostalgia can also blind us to flaws. Or, maybe it sets an artificially high standard for the material. It has to live up to the memory.
We have a wonderful detailed anecdote here that really captures this connection. The author's first encounter with Steve Winwood was through the song While You See a Chance, which was featured on a treasured, much-loved mixtape lent to him by his brother.
And that mixtape context is just gold. It says so much. It wasn't a dedicated Winwood experience. It was eclectic.
Not at all.
It was Winwood right alongside Sting's smooth jazz rock hit Englishman in New York and the atmospheric Irish sounds of Clannad. That very specific blend just defines a moment in time, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And the personal stake was so high that the author vividly recalls arguing intensely with his brother, insisting that he was entitled to keep the tape forever.
We've all been there.
That level of personal history imbues Chronicles with a certain nostalgic power that the other albums, especially the 2010 releases, simply cannot match. They don't have that history.
But it's not just nostalgia. Beyond that, the album is technically exceptional. It is undeniably dripping with class. Winwood is a consummate musician, and this compilation expertly showcases his accomplished instrumentation and his really mature performances.
The author points out some specific details that he loves. There's the funky guitar riff that's bubbling under the surface of Wake Me Up on Judgment Day, which gives it a real propulsion.
And the saxophone.
And the superb, refined saxophone work just elevates Talking Back to the Night.
And the hits are definitely there. He describes 3 additional belters that stand alongside While You See a Chance. You've got the emotionally charged Help Me Angel, the synth-heavy classic Valerie, and of course the transcendent, iconic anthem Higher Love.
That's a murderer's row of polished 80s rock right there.
Yeah. So, okay, given all this class, this comfort, and this nostalgic weight, why did Chronicles falter? Why did it finish third, allowing Alkaline Trio's studio album to advance? Well, this is where the vulnerabilities of the compilation format and maybe the overfamiliarity of the material started to show under the Quest's repeated listening protocol.
It seems like it was crippled by its more pedestrian moments. Places where the material just failed to justify the time commitment of listening over and over.
Exactly right. The author cites specific examples of bloat and redundancy. Take the song Vacant Chair. It has a 6-minute runtime, which the author describes as feeling unnecessarily bloated. And critically, he says it suffers from an overly repetitive final third.
You know, 6 minutes might be a mere introduction for an Iron Maiden track, but for a polished 80s pop rock song, that repetition is a significant liability, especially in a competition that requires dozens of repeated, hypercritical listens.
That repetitive final third essentially just wastes the listener's time. It breaks the engagement.
And this critique of repetition extends beyond that one track, right?
It does. Despite the author's deep personal admiration for these songs, he admits that Arc of a Diver and My Love's Leaving start to feel a little dull with repeated listens. And dullness is perhaps the single greatest sin in the album quest. It's a fatal flaw when the objective is lasting impact and engagement.
This brings us back to the issue of double standards and technical flaws. We noted the Beatles one had mixed issues, yet it just steamrolled the competition. Chronicles also suffered from a compilation production failure, a sound mix issue that always bugged the author.
And the specific flaw noted is a jarring volume shift. Valerie and While You See a Chance are significantly louder than Talking Back to the Night and Higher Love.
Okay, so here's the critical question for the album quest analysis. If both of the compilation albums suffer from the exact same technical inconsistency, inconsistent volume mastering, why does it seem to penalize Chronicles so much more severely than Beatles 1?
The difference, I think, based on the author's ranking, it must come down to the strength of the raw material. The sheer foundational quality of the Beatles' hits allowed them to overcome those minor technical blemishes. In contrast, the flaws on Chronicles occurred right alongside tracks that were already struggling with dullness and bloat.
So it's the cumulative effect that sinks Winwood. The volume inconsistency on Chronicles doesn't interrupt a flawless track. It interrupts an experience that is already starting to show cracks. It interrupts the comfort.
Exactly. That inconsistency ultimately drops Chronicles into third place. It couldn't match the historical weight of the Beatles, and its own flaws allowed a smaller, tighter studio album, one that prioritized that holistic design, to sneak past it and claim that coveted second spot.
And that's the key pivot point for this group. We leave the world of flawed yet potent compilations, and we dive headfirst into the 2 studio albums that represent the modern, intentional approach to album structure.
A completely different ballgame.
We are making a really sharp contrast now. We're moving from the polished 80s and the nostalgic 60s right into 2010. Our next 2 contenders, Iron Maiden's The Final Frontier and Alkaline Trio's This Addiction were both released in the same year. It provides a crucial contrast between modern metal and focused punk assault.
And this contrast is just electric. We're comparing two fundamentally different approaches to creating a studio album. You've got the tight, focused punk of Alkaline Trio, prioritizing velocity and darkness,
Right.
against the sprawling conceptual epic of Iron Maiden, which prioritizes scale and complexity above all else.
Let's start with the victor in this subsection, the album that secured second place and that precious round 3 spot, Alkaline Trio's 7th studio album, This Addiction.
This is a really remarkable win because it completely validates the author's thesis regarding the power of tightness and focus in an album. It's immediately praised as one tight little album, assaulting the listener with exciting and dynamic power chords and some splendidly dark melodies.
And we have to recall, it's round 1 success. It finished ahead of a collection of Iron Maiden B-sides. So it came into this group with a proven track record of beating the archival material of its competition.
That's a great point. And what's fascinating about the author's appreciation for this addiction is its resilience over time. When he first bought it back in 2011, he was initially unconvinced.
I didn't like it at first.
He rated it below the band's 3 previous albums, Good Morning, Crimson, and Agony and Irony. It was actually considered a dip in quality for them.
But the Album Quest protocol, with its repeated listening, that changed his mind.
It did. Time has proven kind. 10 years later, he states he likes it even more now. That shift suggests a depth that wasn't immediately apparent on the initial release. It reinforces the whole idea that the Album Quest is designed to filter for lasting quality and sustained emotional impact, not just immediate buzz.
The album is described as consistently entertaining and purposeful, and it's fueled by a really strong list of tracks that just maintain momentum. Off the Map, Lead Poisoning, Eating Me Alive, and Dead on the Floor. This consistency is the complete antithesis of the bloated tracks that sank Steve Winwood.
But even the runner-up isn't immune to scrutiny. There is one major flaw that the author specifically points out as derailing the momentum. The track Dying My Darling remains the weakest track on the album.
And here we get a definitive moment of the author's unique critical mind. The flaw in the track isn't just musical, it's conceptual.
Yes, the author states that the track bizarrely forces him to muse on a crossover between the reality cooking show Come Dine With Me and the old Cameron Diaz film The Last Supper.
Okay, wait, we need to unpack that. What musical element in a dark punk track could possibly trigger that strange collision of references? A modern cooking show, a 90s thriller, and an ancient biblical reference.
It has to speak to the track's lyrical content, or maybe a certain unsettling quality in the melody or instrumentation. Whatever it is, it indicates that the track derails the focused, dark atmosphere of the album just enough to interrupt the author's concentration and send his mind spiraling into this series of random, almost obsessive associations.
It's the track that breaks the spell.
It is. It highlights just how critical coherence is in this quest.
But despite that one misstep, the album recovers quickly and it sustains its focused momentum. The author even developed a greater appreciation for the track, Dorothy, noting that, in retrospect, it sounds very Sadie-like.
It's clear that Alkaline Trio occupies a specific niche. The author notes they have always been a bit too edgy to go truly mainstream. But in the context of the album quest, that focused edge, the sustained dark atmosphere, and that tight little album structure, it secured them a decisive second place over the comfortable familiarity and the structural flaws of Winwood.
Which brings us to the album that, unfortunately, reached its final frontier in this round. Iron Maiden's 15th studio album, The Final Frontier. This album, which should be the ultimate expression of the holistic body of work in this group, landed in last place.
And this failure is a really powerful lesson in execution. I mean, everything about the album's packaging, the Star Trek title, the cover art featuring Eddie as a space astronaut, it all screams epic space metal opera.
The expectation is for a conceptual masterpiece.
Totally. But the reality, according to this deep dive listening, is, well, it's disappointing. The lyrical themes are surprisingly earthbound, or maybe more nautical. The concept never fully lifts off. It's likened instead to an elongated return to earlier seafaring epics like Rime of the Ancient Mariner or Ghost of the Navigator.
And the first and most crippling strike against it is the sheer length and that introductory material. This album clocks in at over 70 minutes.
And the opening track is described as going on forever, longer than some albums I own, in fact, leaving you gasping.
Okay, this raises a critical point about the Album Quest standards. We're told the Quest prioritizes conceptual integrity, and Maiden clearly intended a 70-minute epic with a long atmospheric buildup. So is criticizing the length of the intro just subjective listener impatience? Or is it a failure of the album's concept?
The author suggests it's the latter. He found the long, difficult opening makes the whole album hard to get into, and eventually almost laborious to listen to over the full duration, especially when there aren't truly dazzling payoffs to justify that scale.
So if the ambition requires 70 minutes, but the result is a struggle, then the concept has failed the listener.
That's the argument. And Maiden maintains the intensive heavy metal style of its preceding, critically acclaimed album, A Matter of Life and Death, but fundamentally the Final Frontier is judged as just not as memorable.
And that lack of memorability, combined with the gruff riffs, which are heavy but not particularly melodic,
Right.
that leads the author to a brutal conclusion.
Yeah, that large portions of the album get quite dull.
Where specifically does this dullness manifest? Does he give examples?
Oh, he's highly specific. He cites The Isle of Avalon and The Man Who Would Be King as two tracks that seem lethargically devoid of interest. I mean, the intensity of that phrase, lethargically devoid of interest, that's the death knell right there. An album can be complex, but if it fails to engage or stick with the listener after repeated exposure, it cannot survive the album quest.
Now, to be fair to a band of Maiden stature, the author does acknowledge that the album is still good in spurts. It's not a total write-off.
Absolutely. He says there are waves of cracking metal coming in these sporadic 2 or 3 minute passages, specifically during tracks like Coming Home, The Alchemist, and The Talisman. These moments prove the band can still absolutely deliver.
But these sporadic moments simply couldn't rescue the album from the overall struggle. The author noted previously that he was unconvinced and needed to listen to it more. And having listened to it about a dozen times in the last month for the quest,
his lack of conviction remains unchanged. The final assessment emphasizes that sheer length and established reputation are just insufficient if the experience is laborious and lacks memorable melodic hooks. The Final Frontier finishes last, and it demonstrates that when a massive studio album fails its conceptual commitment, it ranks below a tight punk album and 2 hit compilations.
Okay, let's consolidate everything we've just covered. Let's wrap up the final results for Round 2, Group 22 of the album quest.
The final hard fart standings are: in first place, Beatles won by the Beatles.
No surprise there.
In second, This Addiction by Alkaline Trio. Third place goes to Chronicles by Steve Winwood. And in fourth, The Final Frontier by Iron Maiden.
So the 2 albums advancing to the hyper-competitive Round 3 are The Beatles and Alkaline Trio. It's a victory for both historical, generation-defining compilation power and for modern-focused punk rock execution.
And the defining analysis really rests on the 2 major themes we've uncovered here. The Beatles won on the sheer, overwhelming, undeniable quality of their compilation tracks. It's as simple as that.
Despite the minor, specific production flaws.
Yes, despite the volume shifts, despite the split-second timing error on Help, the collective genius was just too potent to be denied.
And Alkaline Trio pulled off the crucial upset against the nostalgic favorite, Steve Winwood.
They did. Alkaline Trio won because of its tighter experience. It proved that the focused power of a cohesive studio album can overcome the comfortable familiarity of a hits collection that suffered from its own structural weaknesses.
Winwood's album was just crippled by that bloat on Vacant Chair and those jarring volume shifts.
Weaknesses that the focused intensity of This Addiction successfully exploited.
Meanwhile, Iron Maiden's ambitious album suffered the most damage. It fundamentally failed the test of memorability and consistency.
It really did. The Final Frontier buckled under its unnecessary length and a consistent lack of memorable melodic hooks. It just failed to live up to its own epic concept. And the key takeaway for the album quest here is this: length is only beneficial if the quality justifies the commitment from the listener. And in this case, the author found the effort laborious, which is a cardinal sin for lasting music.
So what does this highly detailed micro-level analysis mean for you, the listener who's tracking the album quest?
Well, it provides a massive learning moment. This quest reveals how repetition and attention to detail, the things we often overlook in just casual listening, become the defining factors when you're judging music for its lasting impact. It validates the need for this hypercritical listening, proving that the competition is testing the design and the engineering just as much as the content.
And it powerfully demonstrated the value of that holistic body of work. Even if that concept failed to defeat the compilation titan that its Beatles won, it allowed the concise, cohesive power of Alkaline Trio to beat the comfortable but structurally flawed hit collection from Steve Winwood.
It's the ultimate proof that simply having a few great songs, or even having a massive conceptual studio album, it isn't enough. To survive the album quest, the execution must be disciplined, it must be flawless, and it must be consistently engaging.
That is a profound summation of the intense competitive landscape of Group 22. It really steamrolled some expectations while at the same time validating the rigorous standards of the quest itself.
It absolutely did. A fascinating result.
So we'll leave you now with one final thought.
Yep.
One that builds on this core debate of compilation versus the holistic studio album design, focusing on the sheer, unassailable power of the Beatles.
Okay, so if Beatles 1, a collection of historically significant generation-defining hits that spans 8 years of artistic evolution, if that was so overwhelmingly powerful that it just steamrolled this group,
Right.
and yet the author still fundamentally argues for the theoretical superiority of the holistic studio album concept.
Then the fundamental question has to remain. If a truly flawless, perfectly sequenced, carefully crafted studio album, one of the absolute masterpieces, maybe one of the albums Iron Maiden themselves previously produced, or a true classic like Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, if one of those had been in this group, could Beatles 1 and its minor production flaws, like that split-second timing error on Help, or the quiet mix on Can't Buy Me Love, could it have finally been exposed and defeated?
The album quest is constantly seeking that perfect holistic experience to challenge the brute force of history. We're just going to have to wait and see in round 3 if the ideal of design can finally overcome the compilation titan of historical greatness.
We encourage you to take this deep dive into your own listening sessions. Can you spot the difference in volume mastering on Chronicles? Is Help really starting a split second too late? Thank you for joining us for this analysis of the album quest. We'll catch you next time for the next deep dive.